For 16 years, my stepmother made sure I knew I didn't belong. Separate Christmas gifts. Separate photos. At my dad's 60th birthday, she told a guest, "She's not real family. She's from his first marriage." Last October, she needed a surgery that insurance wouldn't cover. $87,000. My dad couldn't afford it. Someone paid it anonymously. It took her 5 months to find out it was me. She called me and couldn't get past the first word. But before I tell you about that phone call, the one where a woman who spent 16 years making me invisible choked on my name like it was a language she'd forgotten how to speak, I need to take you back to the beginning. To the 7-year-old girl standing in a living room in Bisbee, Arizona, holding a suitcase and a stuffed rabbit, meeting the woman who would spend the next 2 decades making her feel like a footnote in her own father's life. My name is Marisol Duarte. And this is a story about family, what it means, who gets to define it, and what happens when the person who told you that you didn't belong discovers that you were the only one holding everything together. My mother died when I was 6. Ovarian cancer. Diagnosed late, gone fast, 7 months from the first doctor's appointment to the funeral. I don't have many memories of her, but the ones I have are sensory, the way early memories always are. I remember the smell of her hair, coconut oil and something floral, maybe gardenia. I remember the sound of her humming while she cooked, always slightly off-key, always happy about it. I remember the feeling of her hand on my forehead when I had a fever, cool and dry and certain, like she could fix anything just by touching it. After she died, it was just me and my dad, Tomas Duarte, in our little adobe house on Tombstone Canyon Road in Bisbee. If you've never been to Bisbee, it's hard to explain. It's an old copper mining town in the Mule Mountains of southern Arizona, about 11 miles north of the Mexican border. The houses cling to the hillsides like they're holding on for dear life. The streets are steep and narrow. There's an opera house and too many art galleries and a saloon that's been open since 1902. It's the kind of town that collects misfits and artists and people running from something or towards something, and it doesn't much care which. My dad was a metallurgical technician at the Freeport-McMoRan copper operations, not the old Bisbee mines, which closed in the 70s, but the ongoing operations in the region. He tested ore samples, monitored smelting processes, maintained quality control on copper cathode production. It was technical, specialized work that paid decently, but not extravagantly. He had a degree in materials science from the University of Arizona. He had hands that were perpetually stained with reagent chemicals despite scrubbing. He had a quiet, steady patience that I think came from spending his days measuring things in parts per million, a precision that left no room for drama. For a year after my mother died, it was just us, Dad and Marisol. He cooked for me, badly but earnestly. He braided my hair for school, lopsided, but he tried. He read to me at bedtime from whatever he was reading himself, which meant I was hearing passages from metallurgical journals and the occasional Louis L'Amour Western by age 7. I didn't understand most of it. I loved all of it. Those were the years when I learned that love doesn't have to be graceful to be real. Then he met Vivian Calloway. She was from Tucson originally, had moved to Sierra Vista for a nursing assistant job at the VA hospital there, and met my dad through a coworker's barbecue. She was 32, pretty in a sharp-featured way, with auburn hair she wore in a precise bob and green eyes that noticed everything and approved of very little. She laughed easily when she wanted to, which was less often than you'd hope. She wore a specific perfume, Clinique Happy, I'd later learn, that smelled like citrus and clean linen, and for years the scent of that perfume in a department store would make my stomach clench. They married when I was 7. I was the flower girl. I wore a white dress my dad bought at the JCPenney in Sierra Vista, and I carried a basket of silk roses because Vivian said real petals would stain the carpet at the courthouse. That should have been a sign. A woman worried about carpet stains at her own wedding, but I was 7. I didn't read signs. I read picture books and the nutritional information on cereal boxes. In the beginning, it was fine. Not warm, but fine. Vivian was organized where my dad was scattered. She cooked meals that had vegetables in them. She made the house cleaner than it had been since my mother died. She enrolled me in a better dentist. She bought me school supplies in August and a winter coat in October. These were acts of confidence, and I appreciated them, even at 7, because I'd spent a year wearing mismatched socks and eating scrambled eggs for dinner 4 nights a week. But there was a line, an invisible line that Vivian drew between her life and mine, and the older I got, the clearer it became. It started with the photos. Vivian had professional family portraits taken every year at a studio in Tucson. Her, my dad, and eventually my half-brother, Cody, who was born when I was 9. In those portraits, the three of them sat together. I was not in them. Not once. Not in 16 years of annual photographs. When I asked about it, I was 11, old enough to understand what was happening but still young enough to hope I was wrong. Vivian said, "Those are for immediate family, Marisol. We can take a separate one with you if you'd like." Immediate family.
Are separate.
I didn't ask for the separate photo. I knew what it would feel like to pose alone while the real family picture hung in the hallway. Then there were the Christmas gifts. My dad gave me presents. He always did, generous ones, things he'd clearly thought about. But Vivian's gifts to me were afterthoughts. Gift cards in generic envelopes. A pack of socks 1 year. Meanwhile, Cody, sweet, oblivious Cody, who had no part in any of this and who I want to protect from blame because he was a child too, Cody received carefully selected, elaborately wrapped presents that Vivian had been planning since September. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I need you to understand the architecture of exclusion. It's not one big dramatic event. It's 1,000 small ones. It's the way someone sets a table for 3 and then says, "Oh, right, I forgot, Marisol, can you grab yourself a plate?" It's the way someone introduces your family at a church event and says, "This is my husband Tomas, our son Cody, and Tomas's daughter from before." From before. Like I was a rough draft. A previous version that hadn't been updated. My dad saw some of it. He wasn't blind. But he was, and this is the part of the story where I have to be honest about someone I love, he was conflict avoidant to a degree that bordered on complicity. Tomas Duarte could measure copper purity to 4 decimal places, but he could not navigate the emotional terrain of his own household. When I told him, at 14, that Vivian made me feel like a guest in my own house, he said, "She's trying, Mija. Give her time." 16 years of time. That's what I gave. But here's what I didn't give: my ambition, my direction, my refusal to become the small, invisible thing that Vivian seemed to need me to be. Because while she was drawing lines between real family and whatever I was quietly, furiously, building a life that would make those lines irrelevant. I was good at science. Really good. The kind of good that my high school chemistry teacher, Mr. Olvera at Bisbee High, noticed in my sophomore year when I aced every exam and started asking questions that were 2 chapters ahead of the curriculum. He recommended me for the Arizona Science Olympiad team. I placed 2nd in the state in forensic science, the event where you analyze crime scene evidence, which sounds dramatic but is mostly chemistry, biology, and obsessive attention to detail. Mr. Olvera also introduced me to the concept of forensic accounting. Not the crime scene kind of forensic, the financial kind. The discipline of examining financial records to detect fraud, embezzlement, hidden assets, money laundering. It combined everything I was good at: pattern recognition, detail orientation, the ability to stare at numbers for hours without going insane, with everything I was interested in, which was figuring out what people were hiding. Maybe that interest came from living in a house where so much was hidden, where the cruelty was never overt enough to name, but never subtle enough to ignore. Where I spent years trying to decode the difference between what Vivian said and what she meant, between the family she presented to the public and the family she constructed in private. Forensic accounting felt like a natural extension of that survival skill. Take messy, deliberately obscured information and find the truth buried inside it. I got a scholarship to the University of Arizona, not a full ride, but enough to make it work with student loans and a part-time job at the Pima County Public Library, where I shelved books in the science section and read forensic accounting textbooks during my breaks. I graduated with a degree in accounting, then went straight into the Master of Accounting program with a concentration in forensic and investigative accounting, one of only a handful of such programs in the country. I passed the CPA exam on my first attempt. Then I earned my CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner, through the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which required 2 years of professional experience in fraud detection plus a brutal 4-part exam. During all of this, I went home for holidays. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every one of Cody's birthday parties. I showed up, sat at the table where a plate had been belatedly added for me, smiled through Vivian's careful exclusions, and left without making a scene.
Why?
Why did I keep going back? Because of my dad. Because despite everything, despite his failure to protect me, despite his conflict avoidance, despite the way he let Vivian's quiet cruelty become the wallpaper of our household, he was my father. And I loved him. And love, when it's real, doesn't come with conditions, even when it probably should. And because of Cody, my half-brother, who was growing into a genuinely kind teenager who called me Soul and texted me memes about chemistry, and once, when he was 13, asked me why he was in the family photos and I wasn't. When I told him it was complicated, he said, "It's not complicated. It's mean." Out of the mouths of 13-year-olds. But let me tell you about the birthday party. My dad's 60th. Because that's where the mask came off, not mine, Vivian's, and the whole careful architecture of "she's trying" and "give her time" collapsed into rubble. The party was at the Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, a beautiful old hotel built in 1902, Italian style with a wide veranda and rooms named after the mining executives who used to stay there. Vivian had organized it.
60 guests. Catered.
A slideshow of family photos, and I'll give you one guess who appeared in exactly 0 of those slides. I almost didn't go. I was 31 by then, living in Tucson, working as a senior forensic accountant at a mid-size firm called Roth, Kellner and Associates. I'd been at the firm for 4 years and had just been promoted to manage my own cases, the youngest person in the firm's history to do so. I was making $127,000 a year, which felt surreal for a girl who'd grown up eating scrambled eggs 4 nights a week and wearing mismatched socks. But I went, because my dad was turning 60, and despite everything, I wasn't going to miss it. The evening was fine at first. Pleasant, even. The Copper Queen has a courtyard with string lights and terracotta planters, and the October air in Bisbee has that high desert clarity, cool and dry, with a faint smell of creosote and copper-tinged dust that I've never found anywhere else on Earth. I hugged my dad. I hugged Cody, who was 22 by then and finishing his last year at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. I made small talk with cousins I saw once a year and neighbors I barely recognized. And then I overheard it. I was coming back from the restroom, walking through the hotel's narrow first-floor hallway, when I heard Vivian's voice from the courtyard. She was talking to a woman I didn't recognize, a friend from her book club I'd later learn. "Oh, that's Marisol," Vivian said. "She's not real family. She's from Tomas's first marriage." She said it the way you'd explain a piece of furniture that came with the house. A fixture you'd inherited and couldn't be bothered to remove. "She's nice enough," Vivian continued, "but she's never really been part of, well, you know. She does her own thing. Some kind of accounting work, I think. Some kind of accounting work, I think. After 16 years. After every Thanksgiving and every Christmas and every seat I took at her table, without complaining. I stood in that hallway and felt something shift. Not anger. I'd processed the anger years ago, in therapy, in long runs through the Sonoran Desert at dawn, in the quiet discipline of my work. What I felt was clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you finally stop hoping someone will see you and accept that they've made their choice. I went back to the party. I smiled. I gave my dad his gift, a first-edition copy of a Louis L'Amour novel, Last of the Breed, that I'd found through a rare book dealer in Phoenix, because it was the book he'd been reading to me the night Vivian first came to dinner, and I wanted him to know that I remembered. He tore up when he saw it. Vivian didn't notice. I left at 9:30. I drove back to Tucson on Route 80 with the windows down, the cold desert air filling the car, and I didn't cry. I was done crying about Vivian Calloway. I'd been done for a while. What I wasn't done with was loving my family, even the parts of it that refused to love me back. Now I need to tell you about the next 2 years, because they're when everything changed, not because of some dramatic confrontation, but because of the quiet, boring, relentless accumulation of professional success that happens when you're too busy working to worry about the people who underestimate you. After the birthday party, I threw myself into my work with a focus that my colleagues described as intense and my therapist described as worth discussing. I took on complex fraud cases that other accountants avoided, forensic examinations of corporate financial statements that required months of painstaking analysis, tracing money through shell companies and offshore accounts, reconstructing years of deliberately obscured transactions. And I was good at it. Not just competent, exceptional. The same pattern recognition skills that had made me good at decoding Vivian's behavior made me devastating at decoding fraudulent financial statements. I could look at a balance sheet and feel when something was wrong, a texture in the numbers, like running your hand across fabric and catching a snag. My colleagues thought it was intuition. It wasn't. It was practice. 16 years of practice reading between the lines of what people showed you and what they actually meant. In the 2 years after the birthday party, I was lead examiner on 3 major fraud cases that resulted in successful prosecutions. One of them, a construction company in Maricopa County that had been overbilling government contracts for 6 years, recovered $14.2 million in fraudulent charges. The case was written up in the Journal of Forensic Accounting Research. My name was on the paper. Roth, Kellner and Associates made me a partner. At 33. The youngest partner in the firm's history. My annual compensation went to $243,000, with a partnership equity stake that would grow over time. I bought a house, a 1940s territorial-style casita in the Sam Hughes neighborhood of Tucson, with thick adobe walls and a courtyard with a lemon tree that produced more lemons than any human could reasonably consume. I donated bags of them to the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona every spring. I didn't tell Vivian any of this. I didn't tell my dad most of it. Not because I was hiding, because they didn't ask. In 16 years, Vivian had never once asked me a specific question about my work. My dad asked occasionally, but in the vague, loving way of a man who didn't quite understand what forensic accounting was and was too proud to admit it. "How's work, Mija?" "Good, Dad." Good. That was the extent of it. And then last October, Vivian got sick. It started with back pain that she attributed to gardening, then fatigue that she attributed to age, then a CT scan at the Copper Queen Community Health Center that she couldn't attribute to anything because what it showed was a large benign tumor pressing on her spinal column that would eventually cause paralysis if it wasn't removed. The surgery was a specialized spinal procedure, a multi-level laminectomy with tumor resection, that required a neurosurgeon with specific expertise. The closest qualified surgeon was at Banner University Medical Center in Tucson. The procedure, including preoperative imaging, the surgery itself, hospital stay, and postoperative rehabilitation, would cost approximately $87,000. Vivian's insurance, she was on my dad's plan through Freeport-McMoran, covered a significant portion. But there was a gap. A $87,000 gap. Once you factored in the out-of-network neurosurgeon fees, the specialized imaging, and the rehabilitation facility. The insurance company's explanation of benefits letter might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for how much sense it made, but the bottom line was clear. $87,000 out of pocket, or wait 14 months for an in-network surgeon while the tumor continued to grow. My dad didn't have it. He'd been a good earner, but not a great saver. The house was paid off, but their retirement accounts were modest. He could maybe scrape together $30,000 by liquidating some investments, but $87,000? Not without selling the house. I found out about the diagnosis from Cody, not from my dad, who, in characteristic form, was trying to handle everything quietly, and certainly not from Vivian, who would sooner have asked a stranger on the street for help than ask her stepdaughter. Cody called me on a Tuesday evening, audibly stressed, and explained the situation in the rapid-fire way of a young man who just learned that his mother was seriously ill and his family couldn't afford to fix it. "Soul, I don't know what to do," he said. "Mom's scared. Dad's trying to figure out the money. They're talking about a second mortgage." A second mortgage. On the house on Tombstone Canyon Road. The house where my mother had hummed off key while she cooked. The house where my father had read me metallurgical journals at bedtime. The house that was the last physical connection to the only version of family where I'd felt completely whole. I didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. And I need you to understand something about why, because I think it's the part of the story that people will struggle with the most. I didn't pay for Vivian's surgery because I'd forgiven her. I hadn't. Forgiveness is a process, not an event, and I was still somewhere in the middle of it, in the messy, unglamorous part where you understand why someone hurt you, but still flinch at the smell of their perfume. I didn't pay because I wanted her to feel guilty or indebted. Guilt and debt are chains, and I'd spent my whole adult life trying to be free. I paid because my father loved her, because whatever Vivian was to me, and what she was to me was complicated and painful, and not something I could summarize in a sentence. She was the woman my father chose. She was the person who made his coffee in the morning and sat with him on the porch in the evening, and would be beside him when he got old. And if she suffered, he suffered. And if he suffered, I suffered. Because that's what it means to be family. Real family, the kind Vivian never acknowledged. You absorb each other's pain whether you choose to or not. And maybe, there was a small, quiet part of me that wanted to prove something. Not to Vivian. To myself. That I could be better than what was done to me. That not real family could act more like family than real family ever had. I called the billing department at Banner University Medical Center. I explained that I wanted to pay the outstanding balance on a patient's account, the full $87,000, and that I wanted to do it anonymously. The billing coordinator, a woman named Rhonda who sounded like she'd seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it, walked me through the process. I wired the payment from my savings account. It cleared in 2 business days. That was it. No fanfare. No letter. No dramatic reveal. I paid the bill, closed my laptop, went to my kitchen, squeezed 3 lemons from my tree into a glass of water, and sat in my courtyard while the sun set over the Catalina Mountains and turned the sky that particular shade of burnt orange that only Tucson produces. The surgery was scheduled for November. It went well, 5 hours in the operating room, then 3 weeks in the rehabilitation facility, then a careful, gradual recovery at home. Cody kept me updated. My dad called once to say it had gone well, and I could hear the exhaustion and relief in his voice, and I said, "I'm glad, Dad," and meant it. Vivian came home in December. She was weak but improving. The tumor was gone. The prognosis was good. Life in the house on Tombstone Canyon Road returned to something like normal. And nobody knew I'd paid. That was the plan. That was what I wanted. For the bill to be covered, for Vivian to be healthy, for my dad to not lose his house, and for none of it to trace back to me. I didn't want credit. I didn't want a tearful thank you scene. I didn't want Vivian to feel obligated to rewrite 16 years of history because I wrote a check. But here's the thing about secrets in small families. They don't stay secret. Not when there's a paper trail. And not when your half-brother is a 23-year-old with a newly minted business degree from NU and a natural curiosity about financial logistics. Cody figured it out. Not immediately. It took about 4 months. He'd been helping my dad manage the medical bills, organizing the explanation of benefit statements, tracking what insurance covered, reconciling the hospital invoices. And he noticed that the numbers didn't add up. Specifically, they added up too well. There was an $87,000 charge that showed as paid in full, but no corresponding withdrawal from my dad's accounts, no second mortgage, no loan documentation, no GoFundMe, no nothing. He called the hospital. They confirmed the balance had been paid by a third party but couldn't release the pair's identity due to privacy policy. So Cody did what any 23-year-old with a business degree and an internet connection would do. He dug. He told me later that the breakthrough came when he found the wire transfer confirmation in the hospital's payment portal. My dad had been given access to the account for insurance coordination, and the payment receipt was there, showing a transfer from a Tucson-based bank.
Cody called me. "Soul," he said.
His voice was careful. "Did you pay Mom's surgery bill?" I paused. I could have lied. I almost did. But I've spent my entire career catching people who lie about money, and I wasn't about to become one of them. "Yes," I said.
Silence.
Then, $87,000? "Yes." More silence. I could hear him breathing.
Processing.
"Why?" he said finally. "After everything why would you do that?" "Because Dad needed her to be okay. I said. And you needed her to be okay. And that's enough. Cody didn't say anything for a long time. When he did, his voice was thick. I'm going to tell her, Soul. She needs to know. Cody. She needs to know. I didn't argue. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have insisted on the anonymity I'd worked so hard to maintain. But Cody was an adult, and it was his mother, and some truths need to be told especially when they're uncomfortable. He told Vivian the next day. And here's where I have to tell you what happened next, and it's the part of the story that I've replayed in my mind more times than any fraud case or financial reconstruction or professional achievement in my career. Vivian called me 5 months after the surgery. 5 months after a woman who said I wasn't real family was saved by the person she'd excluded from every photograph and every introduction and every carefully constructed definition of belonging. My phone rang at 7:14 in the evening. I was sitting in my courtyard with a case file and a glass of lemon water, and when I saw the caller ID, Vivian, my first thought, honest to God, was that something was wrong with my dad. I answered. Vivian? Is everything? Marisol. Her voice was wrecked, scraped raw, like she'd been crying for hours before picking up the phone, which, Cody later told me, she had. Marisol, She stopped. Started again. I need to. Stopped. Vivian, take your time. I can't. Her breathing was ragged. I don't know how to, Marisol. Why did you? She couldn't finish. For 3 full minutes, I know because I watched the call timer, she tried to speak and couldn't. Not because she didn't have words. Because the words she had weren't big enough for what she was trying to say. I know that feeling. I've felt it myself. Standing in hallways at parties, hearing myself described as not real family and not having a sentence large enough to hold the hurt. So I waited. The way my dad used to wait when I was a child and couldn't find my words. The way my mother probably waited too, humming off-key in the kitchen, patient with the world and everything in it. Finally, Vivian said, and I'll never forget this, not the words and not the sound of them. She said, "You had every reason not to." I know, I said. I was terrible to you. You were. Why didn't you? Why aren't you? She was struggling again. Why aren't you angry? And here's what I said. Not a rehearsed speech. Not a devastating one-liner. Just the truth, as plainly as I could say it. I was angry, Vivian, for a long time. But anger is expensive, and I decided to spend my money on something else. She broke down then. Full, gasping sobs. The kind of crying that sounds like something structural giving way, a wall that was never supposed to come down, collapsing under the weight of its own pointlessness. I let her cry. I didn't comfort her. That wasn't my role. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I didn't hang up either. I sat in my courtyard with the phone pressed to my ear and the Tucson sky going dark above me, and I listened to a woman grieve 16 years of cruelty that she could never take back. When she finally spoke again, she said, the photos, the Christmas gifts, the birthday party. Oh God, the things I said at the birthday party. I heard them, Vivian. I was in the hallway. Silence. Then, very quietly, oh, yeah. And you still. I still. She asked me something then that I didn't expect. She asked, what do you do? For work. I realized I don't actually know what you do. So I told her, not to impress her, not to prove anything, but because she asked and she'd never asked before, and that was a door I wasn't going to close. I told her about forensic accounting, about the fraud cases and the pattern recognition and the way financial statements tell stories if you know how to read them. I told her about the construction company case and the $14.2 million recovery and the published paper. I told her I was a partner at my firm, the youngest in its history. I told her about my house with the lemon tree and my courtyard where I was sitting right now talking to her. She listened, really listened, not the polite half-attention she'd given me for 16 years, but the focused, hungry listening of someone who has just realized they've been looking at a painting upside down. When I finished, she said, Tomas doesn't know any of this, does he? He knows some, not the details. He should. Maybe. Another pause. Then, Marisol, I need to tell you something, and I don't expect you to. I don't have the right to expect anything from you. But I need to say it. Okay. When I married your father, I was 32, and I'd never had anything that was mine. Not a house, not a career I was proud of, not a family that worked. And you were already there. Already his. Already part of his life in a way I could never be, because you were part of her. Elena's. My mother's name. She'd never said my mother's name to me before. Not once in 16 years. I saw you, and I saw her, Vivian said. In your face. In the way Tomas looked at you. And I was so jealous, Marisol. So terrified that there wouldn't be enough room. That his love was a fixed amount, and you already had most of it, and there wouldn't be enough left for me. She paused. That's not an excuse. I know it's not. But it's the truth. And I think you deserve the truth, even if it makes me look, even if it's ugly. I sat with that for a long time. Long enough to hear the last birds settle in the Palo Verde tree at the edge of my courtyard. Long enough to feel the temperature drop the way it does in the Tucson desert at dusk, sudden and definitive, like the day closing a door. Vivian, I said, love isn't a fixed amount. That's not how it works. A man who loves his daughter doesn't have less love for his wife. He has more. Because love is a skill, and the more you practice it, the better you get. I could hear her breathing. Unsteady, but listening. You could have had all of it, I said. Everything you were afraid of losing. You could have had it plus more if you'd just let me in. I was 7 years old. I would have loved you so easily. I heard her inhale sharply. And then she said something that I have turned over in my mind every day since, trying to decide if it's the saddest thing or the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. She said, I know. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. We talked for another hour. It was awkward and painful and not at all like the movies, where reconciliation is a single perfect moment with swelling music. It was 2 women on the phone, 7 years of therapy between them. Mine completed, hers just beginning, trying to find the outline of something that might, with time and effort, become a real relationship.
I didn't forgive her that night. I want to be clear about that.
Forgiveness for 16 years of exclusion doesn't happen in a phone call. It happens in the daily accumulation of changed behavior, in the doing, not the saying. And Vivian had a lot of doing ahead of her. But I didn't close the door either. That Christmas, 2 months after the phone call, I went home to Bisbee. I walked into the house on Tombstone Canyon Road, and the first thing I saw was the hallway wall where the family portraits hung. They were all there, 16 years of annual photographs, Vivian and Dad and Cody, framed in matching oak. And at the end of the row, in a new frame, was a photo I'd never seen. It was from my dad's 60th birthday party at the Copper Queen. Someone, I later learned it was Cody, had taken a candid shot of me and my dad in the courtyard, under the string lights. He was looking at the Louis L'Amour book I'd given him. I was watching him look at it. Both of us were smiling. Vivian had framed it and hung it on the wall. In the row. Not separate. Not after.
In.
I stood in that hallway for a long time, looking at that photograph. And I felt something I hadn't felt in that house since I was 7 years old, and my mother was still alive, and the world was small enough to hold in 2 hands. I felt like I was home.
Now.
I need to tell you what happened at dinner because the story doesn't end with a photograph on a wall. It ends with a conversation over Vivian's green chili chicken enchiladas, which, I will grudgingly admit, she has always made better than anyone. We were all there. Me, Dad, Vivian, Cody. The table was set for 4. I noticed, of course I noticed, I'm a forensic accountant, I notice everything that all 4 place settings matched. Same plates. Same glasses. Same napkins. A small thing. But after 16 years of being the mismatched plate at the table, it wasn't small at all. Halfway through dinner, Vivian set down her fork.
She looked at me.
I could see her composing herself, the way she used to compose herself before saying something cutting, only this time the composition was working towards something harder than cruelty. Vulnerability. I owe this table an apology, she said. Not just Marisol. All of you. Because what I did to her, I did in front of you, and that makes all of you witnesses to something I'm ashamed of. Dad looked at his plate. Cody looked at me. I looked at Vivian. I spent 16 years treating my husband's daughter like a stranger in her own home, Vivian said. And when I needed help, when I needed the kind of help that only family provides, the person who showed up was the one I'd spent the longest pushing away.
She turned to me.
Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. You paid for my surgery, she said. $87,000. And you didn't even want me to know. Dad's head came up.
What?
He didn't know. Cody had told Vivian, but not Dad, and Vivian had been sitting with it for weeks, working up to this moment. Marisol paid the hospital bill, Vivian told him. The whole thing. The $87,000 that you couldn't figure out where it came from. It was her. My dad looked at me, and the expression on his face. I don't have words for it. I have numbers for everything, but I don't have words for the way a father looks at his daughter when he realizes she's been holding the family together from a distance for years, and he never noticed. Mija, he said. Just that. One word. And his voice broke on it like a wave on the rocks at the bottom of Tombstone Canyon. It's okay, Dad. It's not okay, he said. None of this is, I should have. Dad. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. His hands were still stained with reagent chemicals. They always would be. I didn't do it for an apology. I did it because this is my family. Whether anyone acknowledged it or not, this has always been my family. And family doesn't let each other go bankrupt when the solution is sitting in a savings account in Tucson. Cody was crying. He's a crier, always has been, even as a kid. He got it from Dad. He reached over and grabbed my other hand, and there we were, for people at a matching table, connected by hands and history and 16 years of damage that might take another 16 to repair. But here's the thing, and this is the part one want you to take with you, because it's the part that matters more than the money or the surgery or the phone call or the photograph on the wall. Vivian's cruelty didn't come from evil. It came from scarcity, from a woman who'd never had enough love and was terrified of losing what little she'd found. That doesn't excuse it. Nothing excuses 16 years of making a child feel invisible in her own home. But it explains it. And sometimes, understanding the reason behind someone's worst behavior is the first step toward building something better on the rubble of what they destroyed. I didn't pay that $87,000 to be the bigger person. I paid it because I am my mother's daughter. Elena Duarte, who hummed off-key while she cooked and whose hand was cool and dry and certain on my forehead when I had a fever, she would have paid it. Without hesitation. Without resentment. Without keeping score. Because that's what love looks like when it's not conditional, when it's not transactional, when it's not measured out in matching picture frames and carefully curated Christmas gifts. It just gives. Even when it hasn't received. Especially then. The photos on the hallway wall in Bisbee, now number 17, 16 years of portraits where I was absent, plus one new one that Vivian commissioned in January. All 5 of us. Dad in the center, Vivian on one side, me on the other, Cody in the back making the same goofy face he's been making in photos since he was 8. It hangs at the beginning of the row now, not the end. As if the story starts here. Maybe it does. My name is Marisol Duarte. I'm a forensic accountant, a partner at my firm, and the daughter of Tomas and Elena. I'm also the stepdaughter of Vivian Calloway, a woman who spent 16 years telling me I didn't belong and then learned, the hard, expensive, tearful way, that I'd been holding her family together the whole time. She calls me now. Every Sunday. We talk about small things, the weather in Bisbee, the lemon tree in my courtyard, a recipe she's trying. Sometimes we talk about bigger things. Sometimes we sit in silence, which is its own kind of progress, because silence between people who used to avoid each other is very different from silence between people who are learning to be present. It's not perfect. It may never be perfect. 16 years of damage doesn't dissolve in 5 months of phone calls and one portrait on a wall. But it's real. And real is enough. Real is more than enough. Real is the only thing that ever was. She's not the stepmother who made me invisible anymore. She's the woman who's trying to see me, clumsily, belatedly, imperfectly, for the first time. And I'm not from his first marriage anymore. I'm Marisol. I'm family. The kind that pays your hospital bill when you can't, not because you earned it, but because that's what family does. Even the kind you said wasn't real.